Welcome to episode 87 of In Touch with iOS, a podcast that talks about iPhone, iPad, Apple Watch, Apple TV, and related technologies, plus tips, apps, and gear. I am your host, Dave Ginsburg, and my co-host, Warren Sklar, is here. How are you doing, Warren?
Hey, Dave. I am here. Thank you. I am doing good. And how are you?
Doing well.
Awesome.
And also, we have a guest this week. I'm very excited to welcome Shelly Brisbin, the author of the iOS Access for All book. Welcome to the show, Shelly.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No, I'm very excited to have you on the show here. And this is a great book, and we're going to get to some very much in depth of what you did and what there's all about accessibility. I've always been interested in knowing about a little more about accessibility and how iOS works with it. We've talked about it a number of times here on the show in the past, but I think this is going to be a great show for everybody to really learn some more things you may not know about what accessibility is out there. I would assume you would agree with that.
Anytime I can talk about accessibility, especially to an audience that hasn't heard a lot about it, I'm happy. So I'm glad to be here.
Good. Well, we're happy to be here. And well, of course, we have some news stories and stuff, and Shelly's going to join in with us as well, and we'll just have a lot of fun here. So let's go ahead and just dive right into what we're going to talk about this week. There's two news stories this week, actually. The iPhone 11 was the second best-selling smartphone globally in 2019, and then the iPhone XR was the number one selling smartphone globally in 2019. Had two articles, Apple Insider as well as 9 to 5 Mac had articles here talking about how the top selling smartphones for 2019, and incredibly enough, the XR, which is a model that's almost 2 years old, is just taken off into the market and just amazing with a 3.0 market share versus the iPhone 11 with 2.1. Warren, what did you think about this?
Yeah, I tried to argue with you the other day, saying that I didn't think Apple was selling the
yes, you did.
XR anymore because it's why would they? I'm actually surprised they're going to sell this XR and the 11 kind of at the same time. They're sort of competing phones, I think.
Yeah.
So,
but they're still selling.
They're still selling both of them, and
look what happened.
Look what happened. My guess is inventory is still laying around, and a lot of phone companies like to discount them. So my guess is they were heavily discounted, and they sold, and that's great. They're good phones, and more power to them. Yeah.
And Shelly, what did you think? Well, we'll find out what kind of equipment you have in a minute, because we always do that with our new guests.
Well, spoiler alert, I do have a XR. I'm a proud XR owner.
Great. Perfect.
It's red.
So this is even good on there for you.
You didn't ask, but it's red. The XR was actually doing really well even before the 11 came out, and it's not surprising that Apple would kind of keep up the XR. They always want to have a slightly lower tier, and as Warren said, the discounting that my carrier certainly discounting, and almost immediately after the 11s came out, they were pretty much offering me a free XR, and I was like, well, no thanks, I have one. But it's a good phone, and I think the problem with the XR is that a lot of people in the sort of Apple pundit community immediately discounted it because they were buying the 10X, 10S Max, and the 10S models. And the XR was, I euphemistically call it the wife phone, because every podcaster I know who's a dude said, oh yeah, my wife has a XR and I have the bigger one. And I'm like, hello, I am a certified Apple pundit, and I have a XR because I like to save money. And I feel like the XR and the 11 are both good phones. I'm sure the XR will fall off at the end of this cycle, but either of those phones, if somebody said to me which to buy, I'd say either one, depending on your price sensitivity. 11's got a slightly better camera, but they're really solid phones, and I think it's proof that Apple priced some of their higher end phones a little too high because so many people wanted the XRs.
This is true. And in fact, a coworker of mine asked me today, a matter of fact, what do you think, which phone do you think I should get? Because he has the 6. I'm like, yeah, you're way overdue, my friend.
Think how happy he's going to be when he gets the new.
Oh my gosh. It's going to be so much faster.
But they still have the 8 out there at the Apple stores too.
They do.
Yes, they do.
So when people ask us what phone do they suggest, I mean, generally you like to say, generally anything Apple's going to sell at the store, it should be fine. But I'd be a little cautious recommending an 8 to anybody at this point.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't at this point. So I recommended actually the 11. I just told them, you know what, most many carriers are actually offering, like I know T-Mobile was offering buy one get one free, or you could get 2 free ones if you sign the contract, and so I know there's a lot of deals out there for the 11. So that's why the 11 stayed up with it, I think. So I said, yeah, the iPhone 11. He appreciated that. So and it's a newer model, and I definitely think he'll be happy for sure. So let's move on to the next story. And we talked about this yesterday, Warren, during the Back to the Future. Is the Apple tells movie makers that villains cannot use iPhones. I found this to be it's hilarious. So this was the article was in Ars Technica. Apple does not let filmmakers show villains using iPhones on camera. A movie director, Rian Johnson, said in an interview with Vanity Fair. But they will let iPhones in movies if they're in a very pivotal scene, or if even ever if they I was saying it's even if we're watch a mystery movie, bad guys cannot have iPhones on camera. I found this to be just interesting.
So here's my question. So I watched some Apple TV Plus originals, but not a lot of them.
Yeah.
Everything I saw, somebody had an iPhone. So if there's a villain in an Apple TV Plus show, what phone do they get?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. And I'm thinking back to the morning show where
everybody had
iPhones.
I think they all had iPhones, and
the whole point of that show is that everybody's kind of ambiguous. Anyway, there was not there are obviously people that are worse people than other people, but there was a lot of dark in most of the characters in that show.
Right, you're trying to maybe Steve Carell's character would be the villain, but then Apple will say, well, he wasn't that bad, so he gets an iPhone. So
they're making exceptions to the rule.
How bad do you have to be, I guess, to wear the Apple logo, I guess, is the question. And I think it also, the article I read or heard the other day was it also extends to computers, because there was something saying that there was a show where the good guys were using Macs and the bad guys were using Windows. So it's obviously across the board.
Yeah, we linked to two. I linked to 2 articles. 9 to 5 Mac was was the Ultimate Explorer for movies. The director from Knives Out, which also he did Knives Out. What am I talking about? So kind of a different perspective on 2 different articles here, but yeah, Knives Out was a great movie too. I don't know if either of you saw that, but
I did. Great movie.
Yeah, it was really good.
So is this spoil the ending for Shelly or no?
Oh, don't do that. Who didn't have the iPhone? That's all. I think that's in that article. I can't remember what they said, but
Tim Cook was a good guy. I'll tell you that much.
There you go.
Yeah, that's right. Next story we had, again, this was in Ars Technica. There was a flaw in billions of Wi-Fi devices left communications open to eavesdropping. Cypress and Broadcom chips bug hit iPhones, Macs, Android devices, Echoes, and more. And they said billions of them, which have already been patched, were affected by this vulnerability that allowed nearby attackers to decrypt sensitive data over the air. And they say they're still not 100% patched. Warren, did you see this article? Because it does give a list of some of the devices especially in iPhones, iPads for that matter.
I heard somebody talking about it this morning on a podcast. So I'm looking at the article now, but the things that always stand out to me is when we get these kind of things is researchers said on Wednesday at the RSA security conference, and that's all all I need to know is basically it's scientists with degrees have discovered this, and it's not John across the street who had his iPhone hacked. So people are discovering vulnerabilities all the time, and that's good, and that's how we fix them before they become problems.
Yep, they were established. It was actually established in the standards as a vulnerability last year. So, any thoughts on this, Shelly?
It feels like the people who have to worry the least will be iPhone users because Apple can patch software. But the people that are going to the issue is going to come for random devices like Echoes, and I say that because the level of scrutiny, even if Amazon was pushing some sort of software update to you, I doubt very seriously that my Echo Dot is going to get the attention that the Apple iPhone will. And I think just in general, it reminds us trust but verify when it comes to communication over networks and specifically wireless networks. And if you've got something that you want encrypted, find a way to encrypt it other than assuming that the hardware device itself will do it, whether it's a VPN or some other means. But be afraid, be very afraid is always the message.
Exactly. And the last story we had this week is a report out today. This was on 9 to 5 Mac. Is the fact that Apple may be releasing a iPad Pro smart keyboard with a built-in trackpad this year. And this actually I thought was interesting. The fact is for accessibility, of course, having a touchpad or a mouse. And this is Apple's planning. They say they're planning to release an iPad keyboard with the built-in trackpad this year, with the new iPads more supposedly coming out. The rumors are right now March, the end of March, they'll be announcing this. So, and they even say in here that they may even be developing a backlit keyboard as well. Shelly, what do you think about this?
The trackpad thing seemed like a natural extension of the Apple Pencil. For me, it's an anti-accessibility thing because I don't like trackpads. I don't use them very well. But for other folks, I think it would be a great accessibility tool because it might be easier for you to work on the trackpad than it is on a full screen. And I think it's great. I think. I've seen people use Apple Pencils in ways that I never suspected that could be done, like editing podcasts in Fairwrite and stuff like that. And if you had a trackpad, it just seems like it would make more of that kind of thing possible for people who don't want to invest in a pencil or maybe even who have an iPad that doesn't support one.
And our coverage of CES, I actually visited the Bridge booth, and of course they're coming out with a keyboard touchpad, which was amazing device. I mean, the keyboard just felt so nice. So interesting. Could we say Apple is maybe Sherlocking Bridge already?
Happened before.
They even come out with a product. It has. So Warren, what do you think?
Yeah, I was going to mention a Bridge keyboard, which is getting good reviews on, and of course, Bridge sued some no-name Chinese company before that because they were about to do something like that too. Before Bridge had it coming out. And what I think personally is that it might be good for accessibility, but it's not a great, the iPad still does not make a great trackpad mouse device with the way it's set up. It's still clunky. It's still more for accessibility. It's not really to switch around. I mean, you can't really switch around with the apps. You can't really do the pointer in all the apps, especially some of them that I would like to have a pointer in, such as like remote desktops and things like that. So it's not there yet. So I think Apple, if they're doing this, is a good thing because they'll polish the mouse trackpad feature of iOS a little bit more, hopefully.
Yeah, we'll hope so. So we'll see what happens. We'll definitely see what happens. With the Bridge keyboard, for sure, we know is coming out in April. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. So that's the news coverage we had for this week. Let's move into topics. And as I always do with a new guest that comes on our show, we always have to find out what our guests have when it comes to iOS devices. And of course, Shelly already hinted that she has a 10, the XR, the iPhone XR, and it's red.
It's red.
I actually have a red one too. I have a beta one I use that's just like yours. But Shelly, tell us what can you go ahead and tell us about your iPhone again and what makes it good for you?
So I have the red 10R, which I like very much. It's the right size for me, all that good stuff. Let's see. I have an iPad Pro. I have a 12.9.
Nice.
My day job is at a radio show. And I found that it was really helpful to use an iPad as a teleprompter so that when I had to go on air and do live things, it was easier for me to use an iPad because I could put it on a stand, basically a boom arm like you would use for a microphone, so that I could put it really close to my face. And there's great apps out there for teleprompter functions on the iPad. So for a while I was bringing my own iPad, and I would also take it to meetings because I wanted to raise the screen up to a level that was eye level, which I couldn't do with a laptop. And so
Right.
one day the IT guy comes over and he says, "Hey, I've got something for you." And he gave me a 12.9-inch iPad Pro, which I now use as my
Nice.
teleprompter and my meeting machine. I feel extremely fortunate and blessed. And
You
then
should.
I have an older 9.7-inch iPad Pro that is kind of my home living room machine, and that's got
Okay.
256 gigs in it so that I can put a lot of movies on it, and I take that with me if I'm
There you
traveling.
go.
So those are my iOS
That's
devices.
that's a perfect device to have for that, and you got a ton of space. That's awesome. Yeah, that iPad's gonna last you,
Oh yeah,
a good long time.
that's the thing that makes me happy about it. People always buy the newest things, and it's always fun to have the newest things. But iPads particularly have
Yeah.
lasted me a long time. I actually have an old iPad Air 2 that's kind of.
Sure.
I think I probably need to
It's
give
still
it to
good.
a nephew. He's been looking at it lately like he wants it, so it's probably about time.
I like that. And do you have Apple Watch or iPad or Apple TV at all?
I just got an Apple Watch. I got a Series 4
Oh, nice.
just last fall.
Okay.
I am
That's all I
fundamentally
have.
incredibly cheap. And I had the opportunity to buy
That's
a
right.
used Series 4 from a friend. The Series 4 was the first time I seriously considered
Yeah.
it. And there were a
Okay.
couple reasons for that. The bigger screen was an issue for me because I am visually impaired. And so seeing a tiny watch screen was something I was kind of afraid wouldn't be possible. Then I went and looked at the Series 4 and I really liked it, but I was cheap. So I waited till this year after the Series 5 came out, and
That's
somebody
okay.
I knew who wanted a Series 5 sold me his Series 4 for a good deal, and I've been really happy with it. I've used most of the accessibility features on the Apple Watch I've used, and I've also been very careful about what faces I've chosen because if I get too many
Sure.
complications, I can't see them all. But I was really concerned that it wasn't going to work for me, and I had a recipient in mind if it didn't. But I've been pretty pleased with it.
Yeah, with the faces, actually, you know what I did? I never thought at all. My mother-in-law was never tech savvy at all, and we decided to buy her an Apple Watch, and she was having a lot of frustration with the faces, and I don't think she'd ever want to change any of the faces on it. So what I did was I just deleted all the faces from the app, so that she has only the one face, so it never changes. Because we always deal with that, where the face just you hit it,
it's
and
too
it's
easy to
moved to the other
swipe and
face.
move to a different one.
You know,
which I think is a
is.
feature, but I can see how that would be a bug. I consider getting my mom one partly because
Yeah.
of the fall detection and the heart
That's
stuff.
what we got for her too.
And
Yeah.
I'm a little afraid that it might not work for her, but I think that is a strategy I would use too, is like find the face, probably the one with the biggest analog display possible, because
Yeah.
she would think of it as a timepiece. And then the fall detection would kind of be for our peace of mind as much as anything.
Yeah. Well, just so you know, Warren and I are very much early adopters. We buy the new things every year, and Warren even is more so extreme. He buys one every other day. I always tease him about that, but we both have the 10, the 11.
6 comes out.
That's right.
You'll be getting that trackpad right away too. That keyboard.
Yeah. We both have 11 Pro Maxes, and so we're definitely have that, and I have the Series 4, of course. He has a Series 5. I waited. It's one of the first times I've actually waited and not upgraded to the next one right away.
You guys are missing out on the always-on display and the compass. So there's that.
I don't really get the attraction of the always-on display, to be really honest. It doesn't matter to me. I shake my wrist and it turns on. I don't want it always on. I thought I would think that would be a bug, but that's just me.
It's honestly, I could have. I got it because of reasons, but I could have not got it just as easily. It's one of the few newer products. Like it's one of the few products that is new that I wasn't saying to myself, I'm definitely getting that thing until it happened. But I would be very happy with a Series 4 as well. They're both good. I would not go a Series 3 or below. Let's put it at that.
Yeah, I don't. If you gave me one, I might, but I wouldn't buy one. No.
Right.
Yeah. So, definitely that. And do you dabble in Apple TV at all? I
have one. I got the. I don't have the HD, the 4K. I have the one. Why am I blanking on the fourth gen? Right, but
fourth gen.
I have it and I use it some. My husband and I are on different computer platforms, and so our media serving situation is kind of weird. And sometimes I watch the Apple TV, and sometimes I watch the Linux server that he's put Kodi on. So there's no like one device to rule them all in our house. There's just a bunch of HDMI cables coming out of the receiver, and one of them goes to an Apple TV. So what I do more than anything with it is I AirPlay to it. And I do like the Apple TV is one of the better things that we have from an accessibility point of view, because if I'm across the room, I can't see what's on the television. So I actually use VoiceOver much more on the Apple TV than I do on my phone or my watch. But even so, I don't watch it as much as I probably could. And at some point, I should probably do more home hub stuff with it. But you know, it's there. I'm glad I have it. It was more expensive than it should have been, but I'm glad I have it. And you know, I'll probably keep going with it next time when they make a new one that's, you know, even tinier. I'll probably get it.
Yeah, there's rumor there's supposed to be another one coming out, but that doesn't seem like it's going to be much. It seems like it's
about time, you know, this fall maybe.
Yeah, we'll see. There was code in the tvOS that was saying that there's potentially going to be a new one, which is a good transition. And we appreciate you telling us all about what you have. Is iOS beta. We've made this a topic each week because Warren loves to live on the edge and enjoys having every beta that ever comes out. The exact minute it comes out, it's on every one of his devices. So just for your background for you, Shelly. This week, Apple released 13.4 Beta 3, and other than the only thing that really stood out that Apple was planning, which I had in the article in there as well, is a potential over-the-air OS recovery for iOS-based devices, which is pretty awesome. Have you noticed anything yet, Warren? Because I know it's on your phone.
It is. I put it on everything. I have not noticed any differences, and I don't think there was even much being reported. And the over-the-air update thing is obviously not announced. It's just something somebody discovered in the code.
It's discovered code, yes. Right? So Apple really hasn't. It's not in any of the beta notes, right?
Right. Oh, definitely not. So, you know, running just as much as the beta before, pretty much. Nothing blew up. Nothing's on fire. So that's good stuff.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I was going to say the over-the-air updates, sounds like a great thing actually. And I mean, the big joke is, that could happen where, my joke is the Apple Watch and even the HomePod need to be cracked open by Apple support to do the same thing. So, it depends on what device you have. But like one time I put a beta on my watch and something happened. It didn't break it, but something wasn't working right. And I have the coverage, Apple Care Plus, and I went to the Apple Store because I had heard that they could just get under the port. There's a hidden port in the Apple Watch where you could do the recovery, the same as the phone. And they're like, no, we got to send it back to Apple headquarters, and they have to do it in a sealed room because of the whole waterproofing thing. So, I mean, it's like the opposite of like a Mac internet update kind of thing. So, so this would be good. This would be good if they start heading that direction.
And then Shelly, have you ever dabbled in beta software?
I actually have, because when I'm working on my book, the only way that the book can come out in a timely fashion is for me to use betas over the summer. And then I always wait till it ships before I release the book. But I do spend a lot of time with betas. And the hard part about the way I use betas, because I don't typically put them on my phone until the operating system is shipped. But that's the fun thing about having those iPads, is there's always at least one guinea pig iPad. And especially with iPad OS this time around, it was great to be able to do that. And so I can be running 2 or 3 different versions of iOS at any given time. Right now, my phone, I think it might be on a beta. I'm not sure. But it feels like 13.4, because there are not new things coming out. It feels like they're getting closer to a release, which makes me happy, because there are some updates in previous betas that I would like to apply to my book and get out to folks so that they can know how to use them.
All right. And I forgot to also ask, do you have a HomePod?
I don't.
Okay. So you don't dabble there. We have it all.
I could have predicted that.
Yeah. There's 2 HomePods sitting on one on each side next to me here. So.
All right. Now I'm going to switch over to the video and look. Oh, there we go.
It's right there.
There we go. Hi, HomePod. always forget how little they are. I always imagined them when I saw them at the announcements as being much larger. And I remember going into the Apple store and seeing them the first time and almost walking right by. Going, oh, those are kind of tiny. That's kind of cute. I like those little.
But the sound. Sound is just awesome. So, but let's go right in and let's talk about your book. You have an awesome book. As I said, complimented you at the beginning. I think it's just a great book. You have 560 plus pages of great information related to accessibility on iOS, and I would love to just hear a little bit about the background of the book, and then just kind of tell us. What inspired you to do it? Because I really like the fact that you started the book on talking about devices, before you dove right into the accessibility. So you're really attracting a good audience besides just accessibility discussion. So what inspired you about doing this book?
So I've written a lot of books, especially on the Mac platform, going back a number of years. I worked on, but mostly in the what we call the mainstream world, not really covering accessibility. I wrote about Adobe Go Live back when that was a thing. I wrote about wireless networks. Wow. I wrote about the Macintosh generally. I contributed to several books and wrote several books about the Mac. I'd never done anything about accessibility, despite the fact that I'm a person with low vision, and I've always used some accessibility features on Mac OS and subsequently iOS when they became available, although they haven't always been. So I've sort of hacked my own accessibility. And two things kind of happened simultaneously. One was that it became harder to get publishers to let you write paper books. They're kind of old fashioned now. Right. You probably know this. And then the second thing was I started kind of reckoning with accessibility and thinking about, hey, wait a minute, iOS became accessible 2 years after it was after the first iPhone was released in 2009. And so at that point, I started thinking about, well, there's no resource out there that addresses accessibility. And most of the time, even comprehensive resources that cover the platform barely mention accessibility, and they certainly don't know how it works because they're usually written by people who are generalists and who are tinkerers and nerds, but who've never used voiceover in their life. And so as I sort of got interested in the topic and became more acquainted with some people in the accessibility community, there's an accessibility Mac and iOS and Apple fan community, just as there is out in the mainstream world. Yeah. I said, there's an opening there. There's a place I could write a book. And because publishers aren't publishing books like that, I'm going to try and self-publish it because why the heck not? And that's how it started. The funny thing is I was planning the book during the iOS 6 cycle. And I thought, well, okay, I'll release it. It was going to be late, but I think it was like early in that year I was going to release it. And I got delayed just because the book was much more complicated to put together than I thought it would be. And by the time I was close, iOS 7 was coming around. And the significance of that is that iOS 7 from an accessibility point of view was a mess. It was just all the getting rid of a skeuomorphism and all of the abstraction, all of the bright screens. And it was just from a low vision point of view, it was crazy. And so I was writing this, going into this adventure and trying to explain iOS without, a string of 4-letter words, which is kind of what I wanted to do because it was a really awful version of iOS. And then when 7.1 and some of the subsequent releases fixed a lot of those, not all of them, but fixed a number of those problems, I said that was the only release of iOS that I knew of that I felt like it was specifically done for me because there was just stuff in there that was abominable. And they fixed it and I got an update out, but I've done a version of the book for each iOS cycle. I cover all of the accessibility features. It's organized around the different kinds of accessibility. So blindness, low vision, hearing impairment, physical and motor disabilities. And that was the other thing that was important to me too, that it be comprehensive, because if you look around on the internet, you'll find a lot of resources for VoiceOver, which is the screen reader that blind folks use. But there's so many other accessibility tools in the Apple toolbox. And the only time the mainstream press or even the how-to press covers those features is, I guarantee you, if you ever read an article that says secret features of iOS, there will be at least 2 references to the accessibility settings because that's how secret they are. Nobody knows how this stuff works. And I said, the people who are using this on a daily basis have just as much right to a detailed, comprehensive resource as anybody who wants to know how to use Siri or the HomePod or Apple TV or anything. And so it kind of got away from me because I was writing this book with initially just the idea of, hey, let's write a little bit about accessibility. And then all of a sudden I just decided we have to write all about accessibility. A little bit isn't enough.
Yeah. And you know, I even think about accessibility. I remember, you talk about old versions of iOS. They used to bury it. You'd have to go into general, and then you'd have to scroll through and try to find it.
It used to be now at the very bottom of general, and it was so much so that when I got to go to WWDC last year, and I talked to Sarah Herlinger, who is the head of accessibility outreach at Apple. And I when I was talking to her about the features, because we had just seen the presentation at WWDC where they actually mentioned accessibility, and one of the things they mentioned was that accessibility was now a top level setting, and that was a big enough deal that I brought it up to her. I said, "How do you feel about that?" And she just smiled, and she's like, "That's pretty great," because it used to be really hard to even find it. Even in the manuals, I believe it, there are iOS manuals, and I know people probably think I'm silly for even talking about such a thing, but you can download a thing that says iOS, iPhone user guide, iPad user guide, and accessibility used to be in the appendix, and that just offended me. I was just like, really? Come on, can't we even have a chapter? We have a chapter now.
We should have a chapter. No, in fact, that's funny. You mentioned the user guides. I always tell I've given this as tips before that you can just put it on your home, create a homepage link to it, because it's always updated, and if something changes, it's always going to be there. So, Warren, did you have anything you thought of with accessibility that you wanted to ask? And
I just to echo some of what she said, it's a lot of the features aren't just for the people who need them, but a lot of them help people who don't need them, and it's good to know that there's a resource out there that Shelly put out that spells them out, because again there's like again you'll see tips and tricks out there, and then something will jump out and say, wow, that's really cool, and the settings and accessibility, and you say to yourself, well, yeah, no, I understand why it's there, but maybe Apple could put it in another area too, for just because a lot of people don't think to look there.
Right.
But it is getting better, and again it's just a great thing that that Apple is pretty proactive on making their systems easier for everybody. And I know in Mac OS they're doing the same thing. There's a whole bunch of it's not the voiceover. What's the thing where you could actually talk to it?
That's voice control. Mac OS has voiceover, as well as voice control is a new feature that came to both iOS and Mac OS this past year. Voiceover has been available on both platforms for a long time. And I think it's fair to say that Mac OS is not as advanced in terms of accessibility as iOS is, but it's still very much usable by somebody with a disability. And I think voice control is, it's funny because Apple did promote that feature and talk about it a lot. And for the people that were at WWDC and sort of saw it, I think they were impressed by it. But then I actually spent some time using it. When I was working on the book, I spent a couple of weeks just like living in voice control, and it's amazing. Like, it's just, even as somebody doesn't have a physical disability, I used it to, you can dictate something you can dictate text, but then you can use voice control to correct it dynamically, not just like, backspace over the thing that you're typing, but in the third sentence, remove the comma or change this word to that word. And there are all sorts of other ways you can use voice control. And I actually feel like voice control is one of those things where, because it's a brand new feature, I didn't even really scratch the surface of the things you could do with it. And I feel like there's not a book out there about Mac OS that takes the same approach that I do. And I kind of wish there was. People have asked me to write it, and I don't have that kind of time, but I think voice control is a pretty good argument that Mac OS is a growing platform for people with accessibility needs.
And voice control is actually, it actually needs some level of learning, because when I play with it here and there, it's like, it has numbers, right? Basically there's numbers on parts of the screen, and you're able to kind of get to those areas by saying the numbers of the line. And it's not as if you didn't know what it was. In fact, I helped out a couple of I do IT support, and I helped out a couple of people who turned it on by accident and said, what's going on here? Because it looks like nothing before it, to be honest with you. So it's, it's kind of, it does take a little bit of help to get that learned.
Well, I'll honestly, I will definitely say the magnifier has been a godsend. I think it originally was buried where you didn't know you had. I remember we always had to give tips of how to get that turned on so you can utilize it. And everybody needs a magnifier, right? I mean, it's always hard to see stuff. I mean, I do it with the bottles, pill bottles, or wherever. It's just hard to see things sometimes. I love the fact now it's basically mainstream. You can just set it on your, on your power button, tap it 3 times, and it brings up the magnifier.
There've always been magnification apps for the Mac, for the iOS. Sorry, there've always been magnification apps for iOS, some of which are just as good as magnifier. But the advantage magnifier has is, like you say, you can access it with accessibility shortcut, and it's on your control center screen. And I think their features, magnifier is one, zoom is another one, anything to do with making stuff bigger, where a lot of people who don't necessarily think of themselves as somebody who uses accessibility, anybody who's getting a little older is going to benefit from those features. And I can't tell you how many times I've had somebody say, well, you're the accessibility person. Tell me how to make such and such a thing bigger, whether it's text or whether it's a map. And there are a lot of those features that people kind of know exist, but because they're behind that accessibility setting, they may not know where to look or how to interact with them.
Yeah. And voiceover, I have not tried, but it's pretty comprehensive. I'm impressed of what Apple has done. I mean,
voiceover,
anybody who needs accessibility
is kind of a learning curve, but I will also say that it's really ingenious. If you the level of detail and the amount of stuff you can do with voiceover, you can. Again, you can be interactive with text. You can type. There are a couple of typing modes called touch typing and direct touch typing that use autocorrect to help somebody type on the virtual keyboard without vision and do a pretty darn good job of it. And touch typing is a little easier. And then direct touch typing, I basically call it skydiving mode, because you just start typing on glass and magically most of what you type turns into what you intend for it to type if you're good at it. And so voiceover is not just here's an alternative that will speak everything that's on screen, but there's intelligence built in that makes it easy for somebody to get better at voiceover over time and be a real power user, especially on an iPad. I know a lot of people who are voiceover users on iPads who can just type like the wind. They also use a feature called Braille screen input. So if they're more comfortable typing in Braille than in text, they can do that as well. And those amount to power user features, because somebody who's just getting acquainted with voiceover would be incredibly lost and frustrated. And one of the things I try to do in the book is kind of ease people in, because new voiceover users are often very timid about the device. Maybe they haven't used an iPhone before. Maybe they're newly blind. Maybe they don't understand that a single tap needs to turn into a double tap, and that there are all these alternative gestures. And so one of the things I do is I spend a lot of time saying, all right, this is what we're going to do. Don't worry if you make a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes. I mean, and it sounds a little bit, I don't want to say it's hand holding, but I feel like for the audience, kind of walking people through that stuff slowly when they haven't had the experience ends up benefiting them. And then once people have their legs under them, then I turn them loose and I say, all right, now go try direct touch typing and try Braille screen input and all these power user features. And I've gotten pretty good feedback about it. So I think it's an approach that tends to work.
Yeah, I really like under physical motor. I like the fact that with the Apple TV remote, the keyboards and the AirPods, they've really enhanced a lot of the uses of those devices too.
Yeah, the AirPods have this live listen feature, so you can essentially use your AirPods as kind of you're using the microphone of your iOS device as kind of a hearing aid. So if you put the AirPods in and then put your iPhone on a table, then you can point the microphone at the person across from you in a loud restaurant, for example, and you can have the microphone feed back into your AirPods, and so it'll give you a little bit of boost. Even if you're not a hearing aid user, you can benefit from the AirPods in that way.
Yeah, and and there's also the Siri and shortcuts. Those they've come obviously a long way for that.
Yeah,
and we've talked about that before. Where is it in accessibility?
Shortcuts has always been accessible. I mean, what workflow was before shortcuts even came along was very accessible, and so there were a lot of people who were just tinkerers, the way any of us who love our iOS devices and want to do the most we can with them. What was great for voiceover users was that workflow was accessible, and that sort of followed on to when shortcuts came along. And then Apple also, in the Shortcuts app, in the Shortcuts gallery, there is an accessibility section. So there are a whole bunch of shortcuts that Apple has put together, some of which are oriented toward using accessibility features, and then some of them are more focused on something somebody with a disability might want to do in terms of like automating sending a message requesting help, or putting a contact on the home screen so that it's easy to get to emergency services or a caregiver or something like that. But Apple has, organized shortcuts in such a way that you can find some that have to do with your disability if you want.
In part 3 of your book, you talked about the control and managing your device, and anything else in deep in there that you had touched upon that you wanted to share with the listeners about what's different in there?
Well, that section, the book has kind of changed over time. Initially, the most important parts of the book were the chapters that had to do with specific accessibility types, like voiceover and low vision and hearing impairment and all that. And then I realized there's a whole bunch of iOS that I wasn't talking about. And I would say things like, well, this is beyond the scope of this book, but blah, blah, blah. And then I realized that a lot of what people were going to want to learn was system level stuff: how to use Notification Center, how to use Control Center, how to use privacy and screen time, and all the things that Apple keeps adding, because every time they do an iOS version, they add stuff. And so I made a chapter that covers all of those system level things. So things that anything you're doing that's not part of an app, managing home screen, managing folders, doing notifications, Control Center. And then what I do is I describe how those features work, but where it's relevant, I put an accessibility spin on it. So I will say, at Notification Center, here's the gesture, but if you're a voiceover user, here's the way to do it instead. And then that part also now has an iPad OS chapter.
I was going to ask about that.
As they say, Apple keeps adding stuff. So, so what I try to do in chapters that aren't specifically about an accessibility feature is explain how the feature works generally. And then I remind people of the accessibility stuff they've learned elsewhere in the book. And I say, well, if you're a voiceover user, well, here's the way that you're going to have to do it differently than you would otherwise.
Now, what did you find in iPad OS when they released that, of any improvements, I could say, or changes with accessibility?
The challenge was that multitasking in iPad OS is still wonky, and it's wonky I like it. It's fun, but from a voiceover perspective, it absolutely works. There's nothing you can't do with iPad OS multitasking in voiceover, but the gestures are different and not always intuitive. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, how do you explain expose, and how do you explain the new way that you get to slide over and split view, and how to do multiple windows from the same app. And I'll be honest, I don't use that stuff often enough that I can even remember chapter and verse, but it took me a while to kind of figure out the way to approach that chapter. There's a lot of other great stuff in there about using about keyboard stuff, about sidecar. I tried to hit all the sort of high spots of iPad OS, but again, put an accessibility spin on it.
Okay, and then we usually have app picks, and I was going to say you have a great chapter on the best accessibility apps as well as the access to all the Apple apps. Did you want to kind of give us a little bit what your thoughts were as far as apps and what are good?
Let's see.
If you can think of some. I'm gonna put you on the spot there.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to open up my phone. I'm going to see what's on the home screen today. The thing is, a lot of there's always new stuff, but then there are always old standbys too that are just wonderful. And I guess I'll talk about a few apps that maybe people who aren't accessibility users won't have heard of. There's a great set of apps called the VoiceStream apps: VoiceStream Reader, VoiceStream Writer, and VoiceStream Scanner. And I want to talk specifically about VoiceStream Reader and VoiceStream Scanner, they weren't really intended as accessibility apps, but they became accessibility apps because they were so useful. What VoiceStream Reader will do is basically take any sort of text input you give it, whether it's an article from the web, from something like Pocket or Instapaper, or from the Safari reading list, or even a PDF or a Word doc, anything that you send it through the share sheet, and it will read it to you, and you can control it with it audio, and you can control the voice, you can control the speaking rate, you can control the visual highlight that you see. It's just a great reading app, and I use it as my sort of read later service. And so I send stuff to VoiceStream, and then when I'm on my commute home, I listen to it, and it's great. VoiceStream Scanner for people with blindness and visual impairment. Scanning is the way you get a lot of text into your device so that you can process it. So if you once you scan it with OCR, you can then have it read to you with audio. And VoiceStream Scanner is just a really incredibly good scanning app because there've always been scanning apps that were voiceover compatible. Some of them are better than others. And we've just gotten to the point now where there are a couple previous apps that were really great that were very expensive, but the VoiceStream Scanner is just a really great, affordable, almost instantaneous scanning app.
Okay. So we'll definitely put in the show notes some of the things that you had in the book relating to those apps and such. Warren, did you have anything accessibility apps and any other things you wanted to add?
No, I've been avoiding the stock and the stocks app and the Bitcoin app this week. So
okay,
I avoid those.
Oh yeah, with the pandemic and
this is not a good week to check this. Yeah, but other than that, no. I don't know if Dave told you. Obviously, why would he? But I started a new full-time job this week, so I'm starting to get back into some of the productivity apps that I haven't used in a while, and Microsoft Teams is a good one. It's one that we're heavy in at the place I'm in, and it does a lot more than I thought, initially that it does. So it's for business use, you could make calls, you could join meetings, you do a whole bunch of things with it. So it's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Isn't that what used to be Skype for Business? That it's more than that.
It's more
right?
than that.
They incorporated a whole bunch of technologies into the one app.
If you don't know either, Shelly, I'm an IT support professional for almost 20 years at a company here. So I've been dealing with that for a long time. Yeah, Microsoft. I think Warren and I we have to have a discussion about Teams because I've been doing a lot of training and such on that stuff. So and who knows, we might even be able to put an iOS angle onto it. So it's more in the corporate than it is for consumer. But I think they're trying to they compete with Slack. If you're familiar with Slack.
Sure. Oh yeah, lots of. I've got entirely too many Slack communities. Let's not talk about that.
I think Microsoft really is trying to tap into that market with when it comes to that, and I think they got a good contender. It's been a great product in for enterprise. What I've been working with so far, and the short time Warren's looked at it. So, and
just in terms of a tortured segue, I think I'll say that Microsoft has actually done a really great job with accessibility over the past few years. They have invested money and they've hired a lot of people who use accessibility. There used to be a screen reader that was part of Windows called Narrator that was very terrible. It is no longer terrible. It is not the screen reader that you want to use primarily, but they've also done a lot with low vision. Most of their apps are quite accessible. I say most because Skype is still weird because it's a web app, but and of course the Xbox controller, the adaptive controller that allows folks with physical disabilities to do gaming. And it's funny because people always ask me, well, as Apple's great in accessibility, right? And they sort of want me to confirm for them, isn't Apple the best company ever? And what I always say is Apple is doing a great job. They honestly aren't innovating as quickly as, say, a company like Microsoft because Microsoft came from further behind. And Apple is not falling down on the job by any means, but there are now other companies out there that have good accessibility stories to tell. And that's great because when I hear you talk about something I'm not familiar with, like very much like Microsoft Teams or something, my first thought is how accessible is it? But because it's modern and because it's Microsoft, And because I know people who work inside Microsoft that I'm sure have to use it, I'm pretty sure that's accessible to them.
Yeah, and I'm looking at also a new service that's going to be for enterprise. I don't know if it's going to go out to the consumer world. Is called Microsoft Stream, and what that is going to allow you to be able to, like in the case of Microsoft Teams, you can record a session. Let's say a meeting. You have an hour plus meeting that you record, and then as soon as it finishes recording and the meeting ends, it'll automatically upload it up to Microsoft Stream, which is basically like an internal YouTube. And so then that video will automatically upload, which is accessible on an iOS device too, as you can watch it. But the cool thing about it is the fact that it has it shows who's speaking at the time of each time during the entire hour or whatever session it is. So you can click it right where that person's speaking, go right to that part of the video to be able to.
And that, of course, is great for accessibility for somebody who has a hearing impairment, or just anybody who wants to follow the audio, the thread of the content rather than the audio stream necessarily.
Exactly. So, but I agree with you 100%. Yeah, Microsoft has really done a great job in the iOS side of things too. Outlook, for instance, Outlook is now has a now has a voice reader, so it'll actually in because in the enterprise, well, you probably don't know, but in the enterprise they do quite a bit of locking down, so you have to pretty much be in the world of what the enterprise requires. But when you bring up Outlook, at the very bottom there it says play my emails, and it says 3 minutes, so it'll go through and it'll actually read the emails to you right from within Outlook.
That's nice. That's a nice touch.
They really have added that because I had some of my users were asking me, why is this here, and I didn't even have it on my phone yet because Microsoft was releasing it in stages. So it finally came out, and it's pretty cool that they did that and they added that. So, but anyway, let's go into a couple of tips I had here that I wanted to talk about really quick. On the iPhone, how do you actually send handwritten iMessages? Warren, have you done this before?
No, I have not.
You have not? Come on. All the things you've done?
Handwritten messages? Yeah. No, I've never had the desire to handwrite a message on my iOS device, unfortunately.
So,
but sounds like fun.
So if you go to the Messages app and you find, obviously go in and do a message, you tap in the text field where you want to start typing the message. You put the iPhone into landscape mode orientation, and it works the same way on iPad in either way. And then you can there actually is the handwriting icon at the bottom, and gives you the option to be able to do script handwriting messages within there instead of typing it in, and it saves it. I don't know if you've seen that before, Shelly.
My handwriting is terrible. I got a phone so that I wouldn't ever have to handwrite anything again.
Well, I thought I'd throw this tip out here because I thought it was something kind of cool. So
it is. Well, and actually there's an accessibility handwriting feature. There are some people for whom it's actually, if they know printed characters, even if they're a Braille user, they can actually write those printed characters on screen, and iOS will recognize them and essentially do OCR on the fly. And I thought that was a ridiculous feature, to be quite honest, but I know people who love it and who you don't necessarily write all your emails in it, but it's actually a great way to type, like if you're searching for something and you want to just enter a search term, and you write S with your finger and T and A and whatever. And so it's a secret feature, but it's part of VoiceOver. Right.
Warren, I know you. I have to pick on you because we've been talking, and you haven't had been able to say much. But I'm
learning.
We all are. We all are. That's why this is great. This next tip was how to add text to photos on an iPhone and iPad with markup. Have you done that before?
I have.
All right, so I'm gonna let you run with this one.
No, I'm on the spot. I need to open the article. So you take that while I get that article open.
So it brings up the photo where you actually can make markups using.
I want to bring up the actual article so I could just kind of go through it. But no, go ahead, because my computer shut down. Sorry.
Oh, okay. So it gives you the option, just like you can on screenshots, where you can actually go into the markup mode, and it allows you. There's a lot of icons, and you can add text. You can put a signature. You could put a magnifier, which is awesome. And actually, it creates a magnification of the actual photo. I'm trying to magnify something, and then in this case, you can put text, and you actually can type in text, and if you want to make a note on a photo, you can. And it's a really cool feature. I don't know if you've used it before, Shelly.
Not a lot. It's a lot like having preview on iOS or on Mac OS, because you can put arrows and circles and text and all those kinds of things, or the ways you might want to mark up a PDF. And I don't personally have much use for that, but I think it's really cool that Apple has made that a part of iOS.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last tip I wanted to talk about today was it was.
I'll do it because it's up. I got my thing up.
we actually just talked about
He's
this.
Ready now.
We actually just talked about this a little while ago about saving the manual for iOS and iPhone. So
there you go. So this is how to add a website to the home screen. So if you want to create an icon on your home screen on iPad or iPhone, what you do is you open up Safari on your iPad or iPhone. You navigate the website you want to go to, and then you hit the share icon, which is basically the nice little box with the arrow pointing out the share sheet. And then you scroll down and you find the one that says add to home screen. And then you give it a name. Generally, you'll give it a name that's either the website or something that would identify where you're trying to go. And that's it. And then you got a nice little icon on the home screen that will take you right to the website.
Absolutely. And I know, Shelly, you've used this before.
I've done that. Actually, I do that for Facebook because I don't want Facebook app on my phone. And occasionally I need to go to Facebook on my phone, but not very often. And so it's also nice because it takes the icon, if there's a favicon for that website, so it's easy to spot that F. Oh, look, that's Facebook. So can I tell you a funny story about the share icon,
please do.
though? So my mom has macular degeneration, age-related, and she has an iPad. That's her computing device. And I was so happy that I could get her an iPad rather than a computer, because I was really afraid that she just wouldn't be able to handle it. But I am, of course, her tech support. And so there was a point at which she wanted to, I can't remember if it was attach something to mail or print something she wanted to do that required her to go to a share sheet from mail. And I said, go to the share icon. And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, the share icon. And I realized I needed to explain not only where that icon was, but what it was. And I find it interesting when you have an icon that you've seen forever and you just intuitively know what it means, but then you have to describe what it looks like. And you're like, okay, how do I say, okay, that's the one with the arrow pointed downward in the rectangle. Okay, I got it. And then I subsequently wrote some documentation for her to teach her how to use her printer. And it's just funny having to describe icons in words rather than just pointing at them or knowing what their names are.
Yeah, no, it's definitely that can be a challenge, and that was great. That was great.
Dave and I know that too. Yeah, I mean, being IT support, we
both
sometimes have to draw pictures of what we're talking about and things like that. So
I took photos. I didn't do this in iOS, although I could have. I took photos of her printer's control panel, and then I put them into this Pages document I made, and then I pointed big red arrows. This button this is what this button does. And so it looked like I had used markup because I had arrows going all over the page by the time I was done.
That's
and
okay.
She just looked at it, and she was not as impressed as I wanted her to be with all the work I had done.
That's right. So, Shelly, Gus, our time has gone past so quickly here. We had just a great show here, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell everybody where to go and how to purchase your book.
Sure thing. Well, thank you so much for having me. First of all, it was a lot of fun. My book is available from my website, which is iosaccessbook.com.
Okay.
You can buy the book directly from me in EPUB format or in PDF format. There is also a download that costs a little bit more where you can get both formats because some people like both. Don't know why, but they do. You can also buy it from the Apple Bookstore, which is, of course, a PDF book. It's basically the same book you would buy from me. You buy it from me, I get a little more money, but
Apple's
it's entirely up to you.
Taking that little percent.
Yeah, they get their 30%. But all the buy buttons are on the website.
Great.
On the website, too, is a full table of contents, as well as a free sample chapter, which is the chapter that covers Siri and shortcuts. So there's a lot of information on the website about the book if you don't know whether you want to buy it or not.
All right, great. And then where can everybody find you out in the world of internet?
I'm on Twitter at Shelly, Shelly. Got in really
that's
early.
Great.
I also do some podcasts. I do a show on Relay FM called Parallel, and you can find that at relay.fm/parallel. We talk about technology with an accessibility sort of focus. We call it accessibility sprinkles. So I usually have a guest from the mainstream tech world and then somebody from the accessibility tech world, and we kick it around. So Parallel, and I also tend to pop up on other people's podcasts. I guess I should plug the Accessibility Roundtable, which is a long-running podcast. It's not my show, but I was invited to be a panelist several years ago, and it is a bi-weekly show covering all things Apple from a blindness and accessibility perspective, and that's at maxccessibility.net.
Awesome. So you're everywhere. That's great. I'll make sure we have a link in our show notes for every podcast that we can listen to. I'm definitely I was absolutely thrilled that you made it on the show. Warren, did you want to add anything else?
Just that it was an incredible experience listening to her. That was very good, and it's important. So I mean, it's nice to hear people talking about tech that really makes a difference, and I appreciate it. And it was a pleasure, Shelly.
Yes. All right.
Well, thanks again.
Yes. Now we're going to go ahead and wrap things up here. Thanks. And this is a wrap for this week. Please send your comments, questions, and suggestions to our email address, feedback@intouchwithios.com. You can follow us on Twitter at intouchwithios. You can subscribe in your favorite podcatcher, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, but even better yet, go to our website at intouchwithios.com, where all the links to all the places to listen to us are there. And I am Dave Ginsburg. You can find me on Twitter at DaveG65. I forgot to ask you, Warren, where are I going to find you?
It doesn't matter. Continue on.
It does matter. Please tell everybody.
All right. I am.
Come on.
I'm usually on Facebook. I run a page called Mac to the Future, which is a really nice Facebook group.
3,500 strong.
The Facebook thing. Yep. So if you're into it, if you're not into Facebook, it's okay. We would still welcome you, but we can't because you're not on Facebook. But it's a fun group. We talk about technology. We talk about everything that we want that's related, and mostly Apple stuff. And we try to be inclusive, but we'll make fun of you a little bit if you don't like it.
Yes, and we've done plenty of that.
Yes, we did that a lot of times. I do the In Touch with iOS show with Mr. David Ginsburg that you're hearing now, and I am maybe on Twitter at WSKLAR.
All right. Thanks again, Shelly, for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And everybody out there, thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show, and we will talk to you again soon.